All right, good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals. This is for August 24, 2011. We need to announce the fact that one of the applications has been withdrawn. It is application Z11046 by Mr. Steve James for Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Elizabeth Bray. They have withdrawn that application and won't be heard today. So if you're here for that, that's been postponed or canceled.
It's been withdrawn from this meeting. I expect it to come back at a future meeting, but we'll have no public hearing on it today.
Okay.
And that's for property at 521 East Main Street.
All right. Then the first item on the agenda is the consideration of minutes for the special meeting of July 13, 2011, and also for the regular meeting on July 27, 2011. Are there any changes to those minutes? If not, those minutes will stand approved as presented, and we'll move on now to new business. First, we'll take variance requests, and the first one there is application Z11043 by Mr. Chuck Smith of the Plantation Room for Mr. and Mrs. Earl and Linda Yake, requesting a 5-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot rear setback for principal structures in a residential single-family RS-12 zone, and this is for property located at 3029 Silver Springs Court. Mr. Blumley, if you'd review that application for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. The first application, as you mentioned, is for a variance request at 3029 Silver Springs Court, which is a street in the Belle Reeve subdivision, which is located just south of New Salem Highway and just west of Kimbrough Road, or excuse me, St. Andrews Drive. The applicants are looking to construct a sunroom on the back of their house. Upon completing a survey, found out that their house was only about 30 feet from the rear property line, and there's a 25-foot minimum rear setback in the RS-12 zoning district. So in order to comply with the existing setback requirements on this property, would only allow them to build out approximately 5 feet. I'll show you the aerial photograph now. Here is the subject property here. You can see it's at the very back of a cul-de-sac. The applicants have an existing patio here at the back of their house, side entry garage, and you can see directly to the rear of their house is actually a access drive that leads back from New Salem Highway to a larger single-family residential lot that's south of the Belle Reeve subdivision. And directly across that access drive is the Weston Park subdivision. The applicants would like to construct a sunroom, as I mentioned. And with the current setbacks, they would be very limited as to what they could build. Here's the survey of the property with the proposed sunroom addition added on to the drawing. One thing that you'll notice in their application materials is that they had initially requested an 8-foot rear setback variance. I had discussed that with them, that there is a 20-foot utility easement along the rear property line, and that the Board of Zoning Appeals can grant variances to the minimum setback requirements, but does not have the authority to grant variances to encroach into utility or drainage easements. So I advised the applicants that the maximum setback variance that could be granted would be a 5-foot setback variance, so that it could still remain outside of that 20-foot utility easement at the rear of the property. So as you can see, they are proposing a long and wide sunroom here, about 10 feet in depth, and that will stop short just at the 20-foot utility easement, so that it will not encroach into that easement. You will notice that a portion of the patio is that's just an uncovered patio, concrete slab patio out there right now. A portion of that patio is currently in that utility easement. And one of the things that we wanted to get on the record, and you'll hear me read as a recommended condition of approval, is that if for any reason a utility needs to get in there and work within that easement and ends up damaging the patio, that the city will not be responsible for replacing or for maintaining that patio. It appears as if that patio was constructed in that easement. The addition, as I mentioned, is about 10.25 feet by 24.6 feet. The applicants state that the primary reason for the request is the shape of the lot and its lack of depth. There is very little room for an addition on the rear of the house with the current setbacks. The applicants have also indicated that one of the owners is in poor health and that a sunroom will allow him easy access to an area where he can enjoy the outdoors. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following conditions. Number one, a surveyor will be required to help lay out the footing of the building, and a surveyor's certification must be provided that the building addition is no closer than 20 feet from the rear property line. And number two, per the city's legal department, the owners must acknowledge that the existing concrete patio extends into the 20-foot utility easement, as is shown on the survey, and that if utility work needs to be done in that easement, the city will not be responsible for damage to the patio, nor will it be responsible for replacing or repairing it. As we're not requiring that they remove the patio, we're simply saying that if the patio is damaged in the event that work needs to be done in that easement, that it will not be repaired or replaced by the city. Now, putting an actual structure in that easement is something that we would not allow. That would be different than the patio being in that easement, and that is why we are requiring the actual structure that they're proposing to go no further than that 20-foot line so that it does not encroach into that utility easement. And now I'll show you some photographs of the property. This is the subject house viewed from the street. This is the house next door to the left or to the south. And this is the house next door to the right or to the north. This is at the rear of the house. There's the existing patio. That sunroom addition would come out here in this grassy area right here and extend slightly over that existing patio. This is a view of the neighbor's property to the south, their backyard. And this is another view of the applicant's backyard. You can see there's a row of evergreen trees in front of their fence. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Chuck Smith, who is the applicant's contractor, or excuse me, who is the owner's contractor and who is acting on their behalf, is here representing the application, and the property owners are here as well if you have any questions for them.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? Matthew, I'm just curious about the second condition and the staff recommendation that they must acknowledge that the existing concrete patio extends into the 20-foot utility easement. And why would that necessarily be a condition for approval? I mean, that's true regardless of whether it's made a condition. They don't have to acknowledge it. It's still true, right?
I think I would defer that one to Mr. Ives.
I do believe it would be true, but it is part of the fact that it is in the easement. That would be it. But rather than have to argue the point at a future date, if something were to happen when they're here asking for some other relief, rather than asking them to take out that part of the patio at this point, We'd just like a formal acknowledgement that it's there, and then if we have a problem in the future, there won't be a problem in the future if there is some damage to that concrete because of utility work.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Mr. Smith or Mr. and Ms. Yake, anything you all would like to add?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Chuck Smith with the Plantation Room Company, and we had talked to Mr. Yake about this, and because of his failing health, we wanted to find something we could build so he could go into the backyard. Because of the sun back there, it just faces direct west, and off that red brick. They bought the house in May of this year, not knowing that they thought the whole patio would be okay to build on, and that's what we started with. And then when we found all this out, they're wanting something so that they can actually go in the backyard, because it's just brutally hot, and they found that out this June and July. And so that's one of their requests for this, of a sunroom, or if not a sunroom, something back there that they can get some relief on that west side and use their backyard.
Okay. All right. Questions for Mr. Smith? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Chairman Rogers, I make a motion that we approve the variance request subject to the conditions outlined in the application.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Ms. Yake, Mr. Smith, that application has been approved. Thank you. All right, well, next consider application Z11044 by Mr. Stephen A. Steele of Huddleston Steel Engineering for Southeastern Building Corporation and Barfield Investment Partners. They're making the following request for property in a residential single-family RS-12 zone along both the north and south sides of Audubon Lane, which is west of Barfield Road. The subject properties are further identified as lots 1 through 9 and lots 58 through 73 in the River Oaks West subdivision. First is a request for a 10-foot variance of the minimum required 35-foot front setback for principal structures. Next is a 5-foot variance of the minimum required 10-foot side setback for principal structures. And finally, a 5-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot rear setback for principal structures. All right, Mr. Blum, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. There's a little bit of history that goes along with this, and so I'll go over the history as well as the location of the property first. Right now, if we could go to the overhead, you'll see that the subject property is just to the west. There's Barfield Road, and there's just to the west of Barfield Road. This is Audubon Lane, and there are 25 single-family residential lots that are platted on Audubon Lane, River Oaks West, Section 1. The River Oaks West subdivision was one of the subdivisions that Mr. Claire Vanderscaff had master planned several years ago. And I know Mr. Halliburton is familiar with this situation because there's a rezoning request that is currently going through. Mr. Vanderscaff no longer has ownership of the various components of his master plan developments, which included River's Edge, River Oaks West, River Downs Annex, and those have fallen into many different hands. So the ownership of all of these properties is fragmented now. And Mr. Steele's clients currently own the portion of the property known as River Oaks West. So several months ago, Mr. Adelot, the planning director, assembled the group of property owners along with their legal representation, Murphy and Murphy, and discussed the possibility of joining forces to rezone the property to RS10 and RS12. When Mr. Vanderschaff owned the property, it was all under one, one developer who had a vision in mind, and people that are familiar with Mr. Vanderschaff's plans know that he had quite a vision for that area. But now that the ownership is fragmented, and there were certain components of the development, such as amenities, that it's difficult to figure out who is going to build the amenities when the ownership is no longer under one ownership, and the various owners have different have different visions for how they want to develop the property, or if they even want to develop the property at all. So the owners came together and requested a rezoning from the former planned residential district zoning to RS10 and RS12. I included an exhibit from our Planning Commission agenda in your materials. You can see that, and this is a black and white copy, but you can see the slightly less dark area towards the north is currently in the process of being rezoned to RS12. And the subject property that is requesting variances is this little finger that sticks out to Barfield Road at the very northern end. So, and the southern portion of this large area is being requested to be rezoned RS10. And the reasons that they settled on those zoning districts was because of the lot sizes that were previously planned for those sections of the various developments that Mr. Vanderschaff had master planned. So where things stand right now with the rezoning is that it has passed, it has gained a recommendation of approval from the Planning Commission after a public hearing, and then the City Council has passed it on first and second reading, and it's up for third reading tomorrow night. Now, one of the things that the City Council is waiting on is that the applicants said that they would have some restrictive covenants recorded prior to third and final reading. In talking with Mr. Brick Murphy this morning, he said that he is working on putting the finishing touches on those, and he's going to attempt to have those recorded before third and final reading tomorrow night. The property that's the subject of the variance request is actually already recorded. As I mentioned, it's the River Oaks West Section 1, Phase 1, which includes 25 recorded single-family residential lots that were originally recorded under the PRD zoning. Now, the PRD zoning for River Oaks West included reduced setbacks. Setbacks of 25 in the front, 5 on the sides, and 20 in the rear. And this seemed to work well with the lot sizes. The lot sizes that were platted were maybe not as deep as some of the RS12 lots that we see in the traditional RS12 zoning districts. So the position that the applicant finds himself in now is having to try to retrofit property that is currently zoned PRD and is in the process of being zoned to RS12 for the setbacks that are in the bulk zoning classification of RS12, which are 35 in the front, 10 on the sides, and 25 in the rear. So he's losing a good bit of building envelope that would be there with the setbacks that were originally included with the planned residential development. Included with the applicant's with the applicant's application materials were some diagrams with the existing setbacks and with the proposed setbacks. And also what he's done is he's included some color exhibits as well that I've laid before you. They're the green and white color exhibits. This exhibit shows the setbacks as they are required. Actually, it's showing a 30-foot rear setback, but only 25 feet is required in the RS-12 zoning district. There's a 35-foot front setback, 10-foot side setbacks, and 25-foot rear setbacks in the RS-12 zoning district. And what the applicant is seeking to do is to essentially have the same setbacks for all 25 lots that were approved for the PRD zoning several years ago, which would be a 25-foot front setback, 5-foot side setbacks, and 20-foot rear setbacks. And I think I misspoke earlier. I think the dimensions that he's trying to show in the back is that one of the things he's trying to achieve is to be able to get a bigger backyard for these lots, because the depth is not what we would normally see for an RS-12 lot. Most of the lots are around 105 by 115, 115 feet deep. And as I mentioned, one of the primary reasons that he is requesting this is to have a deeper backyard. Although some of the lots are larger and deeper, some of the ones at the western end of this section are a little bit deeper than that. The sample plot plan that the applicant has submitted shows a side entry garage, and the applicant is committing to only using side entry garages, including plaza or courtyard style, and rear entry garages for the principal structures on the lots. One of the reasons that he is requesting the side setback variances is to facilitate the construction of the side entry garages. Also, the board should note that there is an existing mature tree row along the north side of the subject lots abutting the existing Summer Place subdivision to the north. The recorded River Oaks West plat shows a 10-foot tree and landscape conservation easement along this northern property line, and the applicant has indicated that this easement will remain in place. If the board approves these variance requests, staff recommends the following condition. The rezoning to RS-12 must pass third and final reading by the City Council and must go into effect. And number two, front entry garages will not be allowed for the principal structures. One of the things that I counseled the applicants on is that any time that the board considers reduced front setbacks, the board likes to have some assurances that there will be adequate parking on site. And I think that's one of the things he's trying to address by having only side and rear entry garages, so that there won't be front entry garages only allowing 25 feet of driveway space. Each house in this section will have the side or rear entry garages. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that this request is only for the 25 already platted lots in the River Oaks West subdivision. If he wanted to come back for, if in a future section the applicant wants to come back for reduced setbacks, he will have to make application to the Board of Zoning Appeals, as this only applies to these existing recorded lots. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Steele is here representing the application, and his client, Mr. Cal Gentry, is here as well, in case you have any questions for either one of them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley?
Mr. Blomley, I know you said this at least twice, but I just want to confirm that these setbacks that are being asked for were already approved as part of the PRD, correct?
That's correct.
And when was the PRD approved?
Mr. Halliburton, if my memory serves me correctly, I'm thinking around 2006.
Okay.
2006, 2007, in that area.
Okay.
The subdivision, the infrastructure is essentially complete, and Mr. Gentry is ready to start building. He's just kind of trying to retrofit the subdivision to what his needs are as a builder. Trying to take the existing lots and do that.
How does this compare to what the PRD would have looked like?
As far as the setbacks, or?
No, I got a good handle on what the setbacks differences are. I'm more curious. The application is to make the setbacks the same as a PRD, are the restrictions virtually identical to the PRD? Is there anything that changes significantly or from going from the PRD to this, or are we just completely throwing a well thought out global plan out the window and going back to building on 10,000, 12,000 square foot lots?
I think one of the things that was discussed at the Planning Commission and City Council levels were that the restrictions that were going to be put in place were going to be very similar to what was required as a part of the plan development. And Mr. Steele and Mr. Gentry can address that further. One of the things that I do want to mention, of course, is that whereas before, when the property was zoned as a planned residential development, the city would be able to enforce those restrictions. The private restrictions that are intended to be recorded prior to third and final reading will be privately enforced. They will not be enforced by the city. But as far as how the two compare, I think that Mr. Steele and Mr. Gentry would probably be better addressing that.
Okay, and before we get to them, there are some photographs that were included with the application, and I think I got a good understanding of the photographs showing just the street and the empty lots. But then there are two photographs there at the back that are taken that don't appear to be taken in the same area. Yeah. Are those close to this property?
Yeah, Chairman Rogers, what I'll do, let me just go over these photographs. The first few are just various photographs taken of the subject property itself. As you can see, the road is already in, and the lots have been platted, and they're all just vacant lots right now. One of the things that I wanted to capture was the existing tree row. And I believe this photograph, I believe that's pointed towards the north. There's that existing tree row along the rear property line that abuts the Summer Place subdivision, which is just to the north. And the photographs that you were referencing earlier are taken of the houses that directly abut the subject property to the north. This is the Summer Place subdivision, which is a county subdivision. And these houses are located on Ivy Glen Drive. By including those pictures, I just wanted to give you a snapshot of the neighboring properties to the north.
Though, I'm not venturing into Planning Commission territory, but those clearly are not 10 and 12,000 square foot lots.
No, this is a county subdivision, so the lots are
15 or greater.
Right. Now, the lot sizes really did not change from the zoning during the zoning request. The lot sizes that were platted as the PRD, those lot sizes in River Oaks Section 1, River Oaks West Section 1, are the same lot sizes as what was platted. The plat is recorded, and the lot sizes of the 25 lots that we're talking about today are not changing.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Thank you. All right, Mr. Steele, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Chairman, I'd be glad to try to. Thank you for the opportunity. I am Steve Steele with Huddleston Steel Engineering here in Murfreesboro, and Mr. Cal Gentry is here with me also. He represents both the property owner, which is Barfield Investment Properties, and the builder, which is Southeastern Building Corporation. You were asking about the restrictions, and Mr. Britt Murphy has drafted those, in the process of trying to get those executed and recorded. My understanding and the understanding of everybody involved in this is that the restrictions that will be imposed will be essentially the same restrictions that were part of the plan development. The primary reason that we all decided to go from the plan development to the straight zoning process was we had two large amenity centers that were planned for the use of these neighborhoods. We also had actually 3 different planned developments that were under one ownership. And we had 2 different amenity centers that were to be built on 2 different properties at 2 different times. There were triggers that said when you went into Section 2 of River's Edge, the amenity center would be built there, but it was on property in Section 1 of River's Edge. And when the amenity center in River Oaks West was built, it would be built in Section 1, but it didn't have to commence until properties were being developed in Section 2. The idea was to give the developer, the builders, a chance to get started before they had this large expense, and it was for the benefit of these new homeowners. We're the only people that could use it. When we lost the one person that had all that, we lost the ability to do that. In this particular case, we had the property under one ownership and the triggering mechanism under another, and we had the same thing in River's Edge. So it was just so complicated. It was the decision of the group, and I believe I can say the decision of the city's planning staff that this would be the way to go. But as far as lot restrictions, the intention is they will be essentially the same. Now, we did have 3 different planned developments, and there was a little different language in each one. But one of the big differences was this River Oaks that you're looking at today was intended to be more of the RS-12 style development. And that's why all the lots, with few exceptions, were 12,000 square feet or larger. Whereas in the River's Edge and River Downs Annex, the predominant lot size was 10,000 square feet.
Okay.
While I'm up, I might mention one more thing, not to be too wordy, but Matthew did a great job of pointing out all the complexities. And one thing he did mention was this phase is like a finger, and it goes out to Barfield Road. And it's that finger shape, if you will, that creates the hardship. The width of this property, I believe, is less than 115, 230. It's about 280 feet. Well, normally we like to build a 50-foot wide right-of-way, and RS-12 lots are, say, 90 by 135. So if you add the 2 135s, that's 270. The 50-foot right-of-way is 320. So you can see why we had to have the lot sizes at 12,000 square feet. They couldn't hardly be deep enough, so they had to be wider. So it compressed everything. And Mr. Gentry hopes to better balance the lots. You know, most people don't really know where the right-of-way is, really don't care. They look at their yard because they have to mow it going all the way out to the sidewalk. So by doing this, we're kind of balancing the front yard and the backyard, and we're trying, again, to go back to what was originally designed, approved, and built for when this subdivision, this section, and this phase was actually constructed. And it is platted, bonded, and probably 99% complete.
Okay, yeah, good point. I mean, you kind of stuck with what you got as far as the street coming down the center of this property. If it had been moved over to a property boundary, obviously the lots could be deeper. So now you've got kind of smashed, a little bit wider, smashed, a little less deep lots. One of the components of the application is to allow a wider building envelope on a lot that's already wide, or relatively speaking wide. That I guess is probably the part that I'm struggling with the most, is looking at the property that is immediately adjacent to this being 15,000 square, probably far bigger than that, square foot lots with houses that are, 60, 80 feet apart, to going to this where you're talking about could possibly be 10 feet apart. Why is it necessary to have a variance to the side setbacks?
I know it's going to seem a little counterintuitive, but again, it has to do with the depth. Because of the lack of depth in the lot, the houses are going to be closer to the road. I'll say we collectively don't really want front entry garages. We typically haven't because of two things. One, the appearance. When everybody leaves the garage door open, you see all their stuff. The other thing is, typically it's a straight shot from the garage to the road. And when you're up close to the road, you have a difficulty getting enough parking because if people fill up their garage with stuff, they're parking out in front of the house. So because of that, he's committed to using only side and rear entry garages. In the side entry garage, with the size cars we all drive now, it requires quite a bit of space. It probably requires maybe 30 feet to be able to cleanly get in and out of your side entry garage. And, you know, 30 sounds like a lot, but that may be a little tight for some of the vehicles we all drive now. Well, to make that work, what you have to try to do is push against the other setback. So the house is not right in the center of the lot line, it's over to the side, which gives you the greater space for that side entry garage on the other side. But again, when you ride down the street, most people don't think about where that property line is. They see the house to house to house. Well, if you have your side entry garages, I would think generally they'd be on the same side going down the street, so you'll have the spacing between the homes. It's just that you're up against one side lot line to provide that larger space for that side entry garage. You know, I mentioned that 90 by 135 that we normally, 90-foot width by 135-foot deep lot that we would build on. If you had say a 60-foot wide house, out of that 90, that would leave 15 on either side. And you think about a side entry garage, you have to really get over to one side to get that 30 feet on the other. So that, I guess, in a nutshell, would be why.
You can build. You put the driveway in the setback.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm with you. You're going to use all that setback. Probably put the driveway right on the property line. In many instances.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to have the neighbor's permission to put it right on the, property line, but
within an inch or
pretty
two.
close.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Steele? All right. Thank you, sir. Mr.
Thank
Gentry,
you all.
anything? Yeah, thank you. Anything you'd like to add?
Cal Gentry, Barfield Investment in Southeastern Building. Really, it was just, we just want to have the setbacks that it was originally designed for with the lot sizes and the PRD. If we can get that reduced front setback, we can pull these houses off the back line and keep them off our neighbors there with the larger lots behind us. And just like Mr. Steele said, if we can start on one side and then build the house in the side load, it creates a larger space between and allows the side loads to work better. If you take those two color pictures and lay them side by side, you'll kind of see how the staggering will look down the street, where your house is just off center on the lot, and the closer we can start, the more green you get. We won't put them right on 5, but we always hold off a little bit for error. But that just gives more room to kind of stack through there and make it look real good and function real well. Get the cars off the street and back into the driveway, turn around. If you have any other questions, please let me know.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gentry. All right, this time we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or a motion. We're dealing with 3 different components of this application, so I guess while discussion is not limited, if we want to take motions in a particular order, we want to start off with 10-foot variance request of the minimum required 35-foot front setback.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the first one, 10-foot variance of the minimum required 35 front setback, along with the staff comments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion there? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll move on to the request for the 5-foot variance of the minimum required 10-foot side setback.
Chairman Rogers, I'll make a motion that we approve the 5-foot variance of the side setback, subject to staff comments.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and now consider the 5-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot rear setback.
I'll make a motion to approve the 5-foot variance, the 25-foot rear setback, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Steele, Mr. Gentry, that application has been approved in its entirety. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we'll next consider application Z11045 by Mr. and Mrs. Gregg and Tony Yasker, requesting a 2.8-foot variance of the minimum required 5-foot side setback for an existing accessory structure in a residential single-family RS-15 zone for property located at 2142 Ravenwood Drive. Regarding the same property, the applicants are also requesting a 0.4 of a foot variance of the minimum required 12.5-foot side setback for the existing principal structure. Mr. Blum, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property, as you mentioned, is located at 2142 Ravenwood Drive. It's in the Ravenwood subdivision, which is south of Haynes Drive and east of Sulphur Springs Road. Property is zoned RS-15. Several months ago, Mr. Lewis had received a complaint about an existing accessory structure that was in violation of the 5-foot side setback requirement for accessory structures. Mr. Lewis sent a letter to the applicants, or to the property owners who are now the applicants, notifying them that the structure was in violation of the 5-foot side setback requirement for detached accessory structures, and they have made application to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance so that they can keep this structure in its existing location. And right now I'll show you the property. Here is 2142 Ravenwood Drive. The structure in question is this accessory structure here, which is about 8 by 10 or 8 by 8 along those lines. The structure was installed around 2007 by the previous owners. In looking at the aerial photographs, it was sometime around 2007 that it was erected, and it's there essentially to house the pool mechanical equipment. And I'll show you some photographs in a moment of the inside of the structure, and you can see that it's the mechanical equipment. The applicants purchased the property after the structure was already in place, and so the issue, the violation was something that they did not create themselves. It was there when they purchased the property. The structure is, after the property was surveyed, it was determined that the structure is 2.2 feet off of the side property line. And initially, you'll notice in their write-up, they requested a 4-foot side setback variance. After they got the results of the survey back, it was determined that they only needed a 2.8-foot side setback variance because it was only 2.2 feet off the property line. And they don't have any plans on relocating any closer to the side property line. So staff revised their application to reflect the actual distance that it was off of the property line. So they're requesting a 2.8-foot variance to be able to keep it in its current location. Another thing that I'll mention is that while a building permit is not required for a detached accessory structure this size, the threshold to where a building permit is required is 120 square feet or greater, and this is less than 120 square feet. There is a minimum 5 feet of separation required from the property line by the city's Building and Codes Department. And the reason for that is so that fire does not spread easily from one structure to another across the property line. So if the Board of Zoning Appeals approves their setback variance for this accessory structure, they will also have to make application to the Construction Board of Adjustment and Appeals for a waiver of the requirement that it be 5 feet off the property line so that they can not be in violation of the Building and Codes Department's regulations either. The applicants have provided justification for the variance in their letter. They state that the current location of the building is the most logical location for it, since its purpose is to house the pool equipment, and such as the filtration system. It appears that the pool was built, I think, around 2005, and the previous owners brought the structure in around 2007, as I mentioned. According to the applicants, the pipes go from the building under the concrete decking to the pool, and that to relocate the building and equipment would be a significant undertaking. In addition, they indicate that this violation was already in existence when they bought the property in 2008. And if the request is approved, the accessory structure will be allowed to remain in its present location, provided that the Construction Board of Adjustment and Appeals also approves the variance request as well. If the request is denied, however, then the structure must either be removed from the property or relocated to a location on the property that is compliant with all setbacks. Another thing that I wanted to mention, and I'll show the survey. And just as a point of reference, here is the structure in question. There's the front of the property here. The survey showed that the existing principal structure that was built in 1985, after the current RS-15 setback requirements went into effect, is 4/10 of a foot encroaching into the north side setback line. So when I noticed that after the survey had been turned in with the application, I went ahead and included that setback variance as well, so that it doesn't cause any issues in the future if the applicants went to refinance their house or to sell their house in the future. Just so that the second request is, and we don't like to use this word, but we do, a little bit of a housekeeping measure. If the board approves the setback variance regarding the accessory structure, staff recommends the following condition. The applicant must obtain approval from the Construction Board of Adjustment and Appeals and comply with all applicable building codes. And each of these two variance requests will need to be taken in separate motions. There's another item on today's agenda that we'll talk about, the Construction Board of Adjustment and Appeals as well. Mr. Robert Holtz, the Deputy Director of our Building and Codes Department, is in attendance today if you had any questions from a codes standpoint. Just wanted to make you aware of that. Mr. and Mrs. Yasgur are available if you have any questions for them, and I'll be available as well. And I'll show you some pictures if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be good.
This is the front of the subject property. This is the property to the south. This is the property to the north here. That's the house that is in closest proximity to the accessory structure in question. This is a picture of the inside of the structure itself. There's another photograph of the inside of the structure. Here is a photograph of the structure in question looking back towards the back of the house. And this is looking from the road. You can see the survey stakes, so that's where the property line is, and the structure in question is here, and the privacy fence wraps around that structure. And this is actually taken from the street itself, so you can see there's the structure there. And this is just a view of the neighboring property to the north, from taken right beside the accessory structure in question. and that's just another view of the structure. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley?
Mr. Blomley, curiosity question. If this was just fenced, the pool equipment was just fenced in and there was no structure, they wouldn't be before us today. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Mr. Ms. Yasiger, anything you all would like to add to the application?
No, Chairman Rogers.
Okay. All right, then at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward and state your name and your address and any comments that you might have.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Maddox, and I am the house to the north of this said property at 2142 Ravenwood Drive.
Is that, I'm sorry, Ms. Maddox, is that, if you're facing the front of the house, is it to the left or to the right?
If you're facing the front of their house, I'm to their left.
Okay, thank you.
After consulting with a realtor, I was advised to call about this building because it's a deterrent from my property when I go to sell it in a few years. This does house the pool equipment, but it's an awfully big building for the housing of that small pool equipment. That stands 7 feet tall. It doesn't need to stand that tall. The pool equipment might be 3 to 4 feet high. So they could have a smaller building around that pool equipment there. This also is a deterrent to the way my property drains with that structure there and the concrete there that pool equipment is on, as is the pool is too. That is a deterrent for my property to drain to the south. This at the back of the house was also added on to the house. Was not a complete structure like that. The back part of the house with that bay window in it was an add-on to the house. So that variance there should have been taken care of when that was added on to the house. So that back building, that back portion of the main structure is also an add-on to the house. So I just feel like it could be a smaller building to house that pool pump and so forth, and doesn't need to stand above the privacy fence.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. Any questions for Ms. Maddox? All right. Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else present wishing to speak for or against the application?
Chairman Rogers, I'd like to.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed. That's all right. You're fine. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed. And go ahead, if you want to say something, Mr. Yasgur, we'll go ahead and let you speak at this time.
As you can see right now, I'm 6 foot tall, and the building is right at 7 foot tall. If I have to bring that building down any lower, it's going to be a hindrance for me to work in the pool shed. The electrical wire and the 220 that comes up, that post sits right at 5 foot, 4.5 to 5 foot tall. So it's going to be hard to work on the pool system. And I break that pool system down once a week and clean the filters out. So that's what I got to say.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, sir. All right. At this time, then, there being no further comments, are there any other questions? Are we ready for discussions or a motion? As far as motions are concerned, we do have two components to this application: the 2.8-foot variance of the minimum required 5-foot side setback, and then the 4/10-foot variance of the minimum required 12.5-foot side setback for the existing principal structure. We may want to take that one first, the 4/10-foot variance.
I'll make a motion that we approve the 0.4-foot variance of the 12.5-foot side setback of the principal structure.
I'll second.
Now we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that portion of the application has been approved. We'll now turn to the request for the 2.8-foot variance of the minimum required 5-foot side setback for the accessory structure, i.e. the shed.
I'll speak up on, I'll just comment, I'm not ready to make a motion necessarily because I'd like to get everybody's feeling on this. I'm very familiar with pool and pool equipment, and the pool equipment that I'm familiar with stands out in the open, realizing that you got to put this stuff somewhere. There's no question about it, because you wouldn't leave the filters sitting out in the middle of the rain, you know, that sort of thing. However, I see the neighbor's point of having the structure above the fence being part of the view shed of her house. So, you know, it looks to me like that there could be some sort of compromise made, even if there wasn't the shed here at all. But that's just my opinion. I know that it would be somewhat of an inconvenience on you as the homeowner, because you're going to have to figure out where you're going to put the rest of this stuff if you didn't have a shed at all and you just fenced it in. But I kind of see it from both sides.
I would agree with Mr. Halliburton. Before the public hearing, when I was looking at one of the shots that's down the property line there, I wondered if there was a way to get some more additional screening. Of course, there's not much room there, I don't know, other than just a fence, and I don't know whether that solves some of the complaints for both to try to help out. But it's I can see the need maybe work, you know, give and take on both parts maybe to try to get a solution. It doesn't look like much room for landscape. You're getting into the neighbor's property to buffer it much.
Ms. Banks, we've closed the public hearing. Yeah. I mean, unless, you know, I don't want to go back and forth and back and forth. If you'll come forward, we'll go ahead and let you speak.
In order to house some of the equipment, they do have a double-car detached garage and an additional part, a new add-on to that they could house a lot of the equipment that they might house in there that doesn't pertain to the pool.
Okay. Thank you.
Before I make a motion, I want to clarify a question that I asked earlier. If we deny the request with respects to this 2.8-foot variance, the Yasgurs are not obligated to move this equipment. It would just be that structure would not be there anymore. Is that a correct statement? Okay. With that, then I'm going to make a motion that we deny the 2.8-foot variance of the required 5-foot side setback.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Mr. and Ms. Yasgur, your application has been denied. I struggled with that one. That one was really, really close. If we look at what the requirements are for granting a variance, you know, you've got to show that there are practical difficulties, the narrowness, shallowness, shape, topography, some sort of condition of the land makes it extraordinarily difficult to comply with generally applicable regulations. that the property's physical features are unusual when compared to other property in the same zoning district. You know, those are the two that I was thinking about that I really struggled with. I don't know what unusual difficulties, you know, you guys kind of fell into something that is unfortunate. Candidly, I lived in a house that had a shed almost in the exact same position, and it never bothered me, and I sold my house with ease. Been blessed in that regard. But then also, I would think I would want this pool equipment enclosed. It makes some noise. And I think putting a shed around it would probably help eliminate some of that racket that those filters and pumps make. But when it comes down to it, I really struggled with finding where y'all had met the burden, I guess, to prove the application. So, any event, the application has been denied. So, sir,
Yes.
I'll defer to.
Put a fence around it. You just need to obtain a fence permit from the building codes department.
All right. Okay. Thank you all. All right. We'll now move on to, as we said, application Z11046 regarding property located at 521 East Main Street has been withdrawn. And we'll now go to application Z11047 by Mr. Steve James, James and Associates Residential Designers, for Mr. Greg Waldron, making the following requests for property located at 148 Cherry Lane in a residential single-family RS10 zone. First, a 6.7-foot variance of the minimum required 10-foot side setback for a detached accessory structure that's less than 5 feet from the principal structure. Second, a 22.5-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot rear setback for a detached accessory structure that's less than 5 feet from the principal structure. Third, a 4.3% variance to the requirement that accessory structures or uses in residential districts shall not occupy more than 25% of the required rear yard. Fourth, an 0.8% variance to the maximum allowed 25% lot coverage. And finally, a 2.4-foot variance of the minimum required 35-foot front setback for principal structures. We get paid extra on this one, don't we, Mr. Bromley?
I want to know who figured all this out.
Well, Mr. James.
All right.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. And thank you for reading all that so I had time to get in a ready position to explain it all. The subject property, as you mentioned, is at 148 Cherry Lane. Cherry Lane is a short street that runs north of East Main Street and south of East Lytle Street. It's located in the historic zoning district. The applicants they recently purchased the property and are looking to expand the existing detached accessory structure that's on the property. They do not yet know whether or not they will be able to use the existing accessory structure and expand it, or whether or not they'll have to tear it down and start from scratch. At any rate, the existing accessory structure is actually not compliant with the current setbacks. It's not a very new accessory structure, and I believe it's probably been around for quite a while. Along the south side property line, it's only 3.3 feet off of the south side property line, and it's only 2.5 feet off of the rear property line. The applicants are looking to expand it. As you can see here, I'll show you on the aerial photograph. Here's the subject property here, and here is the accessory structure in question. And as I mentioned, it's zoned RS10, and it's in the middle of a single-family residential area. Included with the agenda materials, and let me flip that around so it's facing the same direction as before. Here's Cherry Lane, and here is the proposed structure. As I mentioned, they may tear down the existing accessory structure. They may choose to use what's there and expand it. At any rate, they want to be able to position it the same distances from both the south side and the rear lot lines, just moving it forward a little bit and then moving it to the north a little bit. You can see that what they're looking to do is add on to it to the north here along the rear property line, and then also the detached accessory structure would consist of a covered patio as well. And included with the application materials is a rendering from Mr. James. You see here is the existing house, the principal structure, and here is what a preliminary design of the proposed accessory structure. That from this distance, that looks kind of like a garage door, but that's actually not going to be a garage door. That's going to be there's going to be a man door there, and that front area will be used primarily for storage. The existing accessory structure there's a current snapshot of it. It's somewhat of a carport with a little enclosed storage area at the rear. As I mentioned, the applicants are looking to build a new accessory structure in its place or add on to it. The accessory structure is proposed to be used for an enclosed hobby room and storage, and then additional storage area above the hobby room and downstairs storage area. The total area of the subject lot is 7,350 square feet. The property is zoned RS10, so there's a minimum 10,000 square foot lot size, but this lot is grandfathered in and does not meet the minimum 10,000 square foot lot size. The lot is 75 feet wide by 98 feet deep, according to a survey provided by the applicant. As I mentioned, the existing carport does not meet the minimum setback requirements on either the south side or the rear lot line. One of the reasons that the applicant has given for requesting these variances is because he's having to meet RS10 setback and lot coverage requirements when the lot is only is almost 3,000 square feet less than what would be required if it were a new lot in the RS10 zoning district, a minimum of 10,000 square feet. We'll just go in order as I have them in the staff comments. First, the side setback variance for the proposed accessory structure. As you can tell on the plot plan that's been submitted, the proposed structure is proposed to only be located 4 feet from the principal structure, and the zoning ordinance dictates that detached accessory structures that are less than 5 feet from the principal structure must be treated as attached accessory structures for setback purposes. So we apply the same setbacks as if it were part of the principal structure. So rather than requiring a 5-foot side setback as would be customarily required for a detached accessory structure in the RS10 zoning district, because it's less than 5 feet to the principal structure, the 10-foot RS10 side setback is required as if it were a part of the principal structure. As mentioned previously, the existing structure is located 3.3 feet off of the south side property line.
Well, I'm sorry. What would be the side setback if it was just a regular detached structure?
5 feet.
Okay.
Right. Detached accessory structures that are less than 5 feet to the principal structure have to maintain the same setbacks as the principal structure. And I apologize if I didn't explain that
Can you just go down, what would be the rear setback if it was just straight detached?
If it was greater than 5 feet from the principal structure?
Yes, sir.
5 feet. It would have to be at least 5 feet off the side and rear lot lines.
Okay, thank you, I'm sorry.
Sure. I know this one is a complicated application, so if at any time you'll need me to stop and clarify something, please let me know. As mentioned previously, the existing structure is located 3.3 feet off of the south side property line, and the applicants propose to construct the new building at the same distance to the south side property line. Thus, a 6.7-foot side setback variance is required in order to be able to do this. 6.7-foot variance from that minimum 10-foot side setback requirement. The rear setback variance for the existing or for the accessory structure, the same would apply. It would have to meet the principal structure setbacks. In the RS10 zoning district, the minimum rear setback requirement for principal structures is 25 feet. So rather than being required to meet the 5-foot side setback, or excuse me, the 5-foot rear setback, if it were greater than 5 feet from the principal structure, it's required to meet the 25-foot rear setback as if it were part of the principal structure. The applicants are proposing to build the structure 2.5 feet off of that rear property line, and thus are requesting a 22.5-foot rear setback variance to the 25-foot minimum rear setback requirement. Number 3, the variance to the maximum 25% allowed rear yard coverage. The zoning ordinance states that in residential districts, accessory structures cannot take up more than 25% of the required rear yard. So with the lot being 75 feet wide, we multiplied that by 25, because that would be the total square footage of the required rear yard, which is 1,875 square feet. On this property, accessory structures can take up no more than 468.75 square feet. According to the applicant, the portion of the proposed structure in the required rear yard is 550 square feet, which is 29.3% of the required rear yard, requiring a variance of 4.3%. Now, a variance to the maximum 25% allowed lot coverage. Lot size is 7,350 square feet. The maximum lot coverage in the RS10 zoning district is 25%, meaning that the total footprint that structures can take up in the on this lot is 1,837.5 square feet. The footprint of the existing house combined with the proposed accessory structure is 1,895.59 square feet, or 25.8%, requiring a 0.8% variance. The board should note that these figures vary slightly from the figures provided by the applicant, as staff noticed a discrepancy in the applicant's calculations, a very minor discrepancy. Finally, front setback variance for principal structures. There's an existing uncovered stoop in front of the existing house. The applicant would like to provide a cover over it and make it into a small stoop/porch. And the zoning ordinance allows porches to encroach into a setback as long as the porch does not extend more than 42 inches from an exterior wall. The proposed covered stoop/porch extends 45.6 inches from the front wall of the house, meaning that it is not exempt from the 35-foot front setback. It is proposed to encroach 2.4 feet into the front setback. The applicant provides his justification for the variances in his letter. The existing house was built in 1947. Not sure when the existing accessory structure was built. As mentioned previously, the lot is almost 3,000 square feet less than the minimum lot size in the RS10 zone in which it is located, yet it is still required to meet the current zoning requirements for the RS10 zone. The existing accessory structure already encroaches into the side and rear setbacks, and he does not propose to build the structure any closer to the side and rear lot lines. The proposed garage will be required to meet, if the Board of Zoning Appeals approves the variances, the proposed garage will also have to go to the Historic Zoning Commission so that the Historic Zoning Commission can review the the facade of the building and make sure it is in compliance with the aesthetic of the historic zoning district. And in addition, as I mentioned before, there is a minimum 5-foot separation requirement in the building code from side and rear or from any property line for any structures. The existing structure was built before that requirement went into effect several years ago, but it is not. But if he is adding walls or if he is expanding it as he proposes to do, it is not exempt from that requirement. So, in addition to going to the Historic Zoning Commission, it would also have to go to the Construction Board of Adjustment and Appeals for a waiver to the requirement that it be 5 feet from the side and rear property lines. And as I mentioned, Mr. Holtz, the Deputy Director of our Building and Codes Department, is here if you have any questions for him regarding that. Finally, one of the things that I want to add is that one of the neighbors came in and mentioned that there is a utility pole near the rear property line. It's actually, if you look at the survey, it's on the Cunningham property, which is a little bit to the rear and to the south of the subject property. He mentioned that he wanted to make sure that there were no conflicts with this, with the electric infrastructure that was there on this pole, as well as any other utilities. So the applicant and the planning staff both contacted the Murfreesboro Electric Department, and one of the things that I laid in front of you is a letter from the Murfreesboro Electric Department stating that that they do not have any issues with the construction as proposed. In addition, the Electric Department also cautioned us that there appeared to be Comcast and AT&T facilities on this pole. So I contacted both representatives from both AT&T and Comcast, and you'll see that also included is correspondence from AT&T and Comcast stating that if certain conditions are met, that they don't have an issue with the structure either. So if the board approves the requests, staff recommend that they all be subject to the following conditions. The project will be subject to the review and approval of the Murfreesboro Historic Zoning Commission. Number 2, a surveyor will be required to help lay out the footing of the building, and a surveyor's certification must be provided that all construction is compliant with the actions of the board with regards to both setbacks and lot coverage. Number 3, I'd like to add that any proposed construction must be approved by the Murfreesboro Electric Department, AT&T, and Comcast, as there are utilities to the rear of the house that we want to make sure that the building does not conflict with. If the board approves the request regarding the side and rear setbacks for the accessory structure, staff recommends the following condition. The applicant must obtain approval from the Construction Board of Adjustment and Appeals and comply with all applicable building codes. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And Mr. James and Mr. Waldron, his client, are both here if you have any questions for them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? Mr. Blomley, just to summarize, the existing structure is there because it was built prior to the invention of setbacks as far as the city is concerned, right?
I'm not certain when it was built, but it appears that it's likely that it was built prior to the zoning regulations.
And the proposed structure is comparable in footprint. Is it how much bigger? What percentage bigger? Square footage bigger? Or is it smaller?
The new structure is about 590 square feet, and I'm not sure the exact square footage of the existing structure. Mr. James may have that.
Okay, but from a standpoint of location, they're going to essentially the footprints are going to overlap. If the new one may be a little bit bigger and extend into the yard and up the driveway a little bit, if any.
That's correct. It will, and the footprint of the new structure will be larger.
Okay.
It will maintain the same distance from the side and rear property lines, but it will extend further to the north and further up the driveway. You are correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Same distance from the property line, so.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Mr. James or Mr. Waldron, anything you all would like to add to the application?
I'd like to thank y'all. I'm Steve James with James & Associates, representing Mr. Waldron. The only thing I wanted to add, I do not have the square footage of the existing building, but the proposed building is a little larger, and we're adding a porch too. We're using the same footprint of the existing, plus we're adding a side covered porch. So it's a little larger, but not much larger than the existing building. Mr. Blomley did a great job of explaining this. Took us a while to come up with all this. I hope you all enjoyed it. And another thing I'd like to add is we've looked at the existing structure. Right now, we've contemplated using the existing structure and trying to remodel it, or in my opinion, it would be better to tear it down and just start over, because there's termites involved, and just the construction cost alone, trying to salvage that as compared to new construction, be a lot less.
James, do you have any idea of when that existing structure was built?
From the looks of it, I'd say 20, 25 years at least, but I don't know the exact date on it.
Okay.
Been here as long as I can remember. Every time I've been by, it was there. So.
Mr. Rogers, one thing that I wanted to mention, I have not researched the when that structure was built, so I cannot say for certain whether or not it is grandfathered in. In response to your question a few moments ago, but as Mr. James noted, it does appear somewhat aged, and so to say for certain whether or not it is grandfathered in, I do not know, and I did not research that.
Okay. Okay. Any questions for Mr. James? All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Waldron, from the plat, it looks like is Bob Bullen on your right side, I guess?
If you're looking at our house, Mr. Bullen's to the right, and then Susan Lloyd's house is to the left.
Okay. Well, you have my sincere sympathies living next to Dr. Bullen.
It's been quite a treat.
I'm sure he's just a constant source of irritation for you.
Oh, no, I could never say that about a neighbor.
Yeah, he's a great guy. This is probably one of the coolest streets in Murfreesboro, I believe.
No, thank you. We're excited to live there, and you can see the structure. It's 6x6 post, and I'm not positive when it was built, but based upon the appearance of the concrete and the amount of the coats of paint that are on it, it's been there for some time. And I agree with Mr. James. It would probably be a bigger hindrance to try to build around this or work with it. We would, at this point, we're more than likely would be demolishing it if we get this approval and the approval from the other commissions, and start from scratch.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Waldron? All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman Rogers, in my long-winded explanation, I did forget to show the photographs that I had included in your packages, if the board would like to see those.
I think that'd be good.
And this is looking down the driveway from Cherry Lane back to the existing structure. This is Mr. and Mrs. Waldron's house here. Oh, and you can see the utility pole in question behind the existing structure. This is a view of the side of the structure from the backyard. As I mentioned, it will be built out somewhat here, and there would be a covered patio in this area. And this is looking at the neighbor's property to the rear. And there's the power pole behind the subject property. And this is looking in between the two accessory structures. This is Mr. Bullen's accessory structure to the south. It's the front of the subject property. and there's that stoop that would be covered. That's requiring the front setback variance.
Does Mr. Bullen need a setback variance? I'm just kidding. I don't even want to go there.
He needs lots of help.
Anyway, those are just some snapshots of the property.
All right. At this time, then, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward.
I'm Peter Cunningham. I am the property directly behind the Waldrons. First, if you went after Bob Bullen, you'd have to go after me and everybody else on both of those streets, because I think all the homes predate the ordinances, and everybody's got a garage, a lean-to or something that's backed up to the property line. So I don't know that anybody would have a great deal of difficulty with the structure being built to some degree close to the rear or the side setbacks. At least he who was without stone would be hard to find. He who's without sin would be hard to find in terms of casting stones. I do want to mention two things, though. First is the concern about the utility easement or the power that runs behind between our property and the Waldrons, and I think that is important to verify. I know there's a vault. My power comes off that pole, goes into a vault in the ground in the back of the Waldron's yard, and then comes into my yard as an underground utility. There are also cables that run both to the Waldron home and to the Bullen's home from that pole. The existing structure, I think they're correct, is probably held together by the paint more than anything else, and would probably need to be taken down. The replacement structure is a two-story structure. That would probably be in the way of the current utility lines that run to the houses from that pole. The current structure is probably an 8-foot tall structure, flat roof, and while I can see it from inside my yard over the privacy fence, I think the replacement structure that they're talking about is a two-story structure, and where the existing structure is probably about 10 feet in width against the back property line, and I could be wrong a foot or two there. I think the existing structure is not a slight increase in footprint, but is probably, with the covered porch, closer to 4 times the size of that structure. I'm going to be a good neighbor to my neighbor. I'm not going to argue about anything, but I suppose that's where the Historic Zone Commission comes in to look at height of structure and things of that nature. So I'm asking that question of the commission. Is that correct?
And Mr. Blum would probably be a better candidate to answer that question than I would be.
The aesthetics of the structure itself will be more under the purview of the Historic Zoning Commission. That's correct. What we would be considering now would be the variances with regards to our bulk regulations for the RS10 zoning district, the setbacks and the lot coverage requirements. And that is that's the reason why I've those overhead power lines. That's one of the reasons why, and I appreciate Mr. Cunningham for bringing that to my attention. That's the information that he provided helped us to help prompt us to contact the utilities, and that is the reason why, after having researched it with the utilities, I'm recommending that any approval be subject to the approval of MED, AT&T, and Comcast, as they appear to be the 3 utilities that are on that pole right there.
And it's part of your email that you gave us, or AT&T at least is just wanting to make sure that that's the case, that the proposed building is not too high.
Right. And you know, they may have to adjust the height of their building or the design of their building, you know, based on what the utilities will allow. And the aesthetics of the building will be something that will be more, would be discussed in greater detail at the Historic Zoning Commission. So that's something that we would recommend that they research, you know, before they go to the Historic Zoning Commission, what height building would be permissible by those utilities at that location.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. All right. Anyone else present wishing to speak for or against the application? Okay. Mr. Waldron.
On the height of the structure, when we began this idea to do this, we talked first with the Historical Zoning Committee, and the secondary structure can only be as tall as the primary structure, which it's right at 17 feet, if I'm not mistaken. So the design that you saw that Mr. James presented is based upon that height. And so we have contacted them on that. We did find in some of the notes the existing structure is 312 square feet versus 550 is what we're proposing. So when I did speak with a representative of the Murfreesboro Electric Department, the secondary vault, which my underground power comes from the back of the lot to the back of the house at my meter base. The vault is actually based upon the pins that are in the ground on Mr. Freeman. It's kind of just off to the edge. It's right at the property line, but the bulk of the vault is on Mr. Freeman, which is kind of a adjoining neighbor between Mr. Cunningham and myself. And then we did have Comcast come out and look. And in fact, when we were having Comcast installed at the house when we moved in, we pointed out that in the future we would be hopefully adding this structure. And so the line that runs from the pole now to our house is a temporary line, and Comcast is aware of that, with the idea in mind, once we have completed construction, we will come back with an underground line for our cable, which includes our phone, because we have our phone through Comcast now. So, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, sir. All right. We'll give.
I'll make this very quick.
That's all right.
I apologize, Mr. Waldron, if I inferred that vault was on his property. When you eyeball it back there, there's no telling whose line you're looking at. Those fences have been built and rebuilt so many times over the years that it's hard to know where anybody is.
I understand.
Okay.
We're
all close neighbors.
That's right. Very good. All right. If there's no one else present then wishing to speak, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and open the floor for further discussions or motion. And again, we've got 5 here that we need to consider. Looks like we can take these in the order that they're listed. First of all, we'll deal with the 6.7-foot variance of the side setback.
Chairman Rogers, I make a motion we approve that variance, subject to staff comments.
No second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll now consider the 22.5-foot variance of the rear setback.
Make a motion to approve the 22.5-foot variance, subject to the staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll now consider the 4.3% variance to the 25% required rear yard.
Chairman Rogers, I make a motion we approve, subject to staff comments.
No second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll now consider the 0.8% variance to the maximum allowed 25% lot coverage.
Motion to approve the 0.8% variance, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And lastly, the 2.4-foot variance of the minimum required 35-foot front setback. This is for the front porch.
Chairman Rogers, I make a motion we approve subject to staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. That, Mr. Waldron, that application has been approved in its entirety. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you, Mr. James, your input. And Mr. Cunningham, we appreciate you being here as well. Thank you. Thank you all for your help on this one.
Chairman Rogers, as a point of clarification, one could, I believe Ms. Davis said that Mr. Cunningham didn't state his address at the podium.
Mr. Cunningham.
145 Park Circle.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you, sir.
And as a second point of clarification, were the motions subject to both written and verbal staff comments?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll now move on to application Z11048 by Ms. Rihanna Saray for Bambini Village Montessori Preschool and the Church of the Holy Cross, requesting an amendment to special use permit originally approved on August 27, 2008, allowing child care, which would be a Montessori preschool, as a permitted accessory use to the existing institutional group assembly use, which was a church. This is for property located at 1140 Cason Lane. The subject property is located in a residential single-family RS10, RS12, and RS15 zone, and the applicant wishes to amend the special use permit in order to modify several aspects of the child care operation. Mr. Blum, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property, as you mentioned, is at 1140 Cason Lane. We would pull up the aerial photograph. It's Holy Cross Episcopal Church. Here's the church building here, and here is the existing parish hall and office, which is an old house that was converted into the parish hall and office. The property is on the west side of Cason Lane, just to the north of Windermere Drive. Back in 2003, the subject property was approved for a special use permit for a church. That was before we amended our zoning ordinance and included places of worship in a category called institutional group assembly uses. In 2003, the church specifically said that they would not have child care as an accessory use at the church. Then back in 2008, Holy Cross appeared before the board to amend its special use permit to allow child care in the form of a Montessori preschool. Now the current applicant, Ms. Saria, who is the director of the Montessori preschool, wishes to make several modifications, amendments, if you will, to the special use permit that was approved in 2008 to allow child care as a permitted accessory use to this place of worship. Back in 2008, it was specified that there would be no more than 12 children there at one time. There would be 2 3-hour sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and it was specified that there would be no more than 12 children in each of those sessions. Ms. Saria is requesting to amend that so that there can be a maximum of 30 children there at one time. And that would not be in sessions. That would be a maximum of 30 children there at overall. Secondly, in 2008, when the special use permit amendment was approved, the daycare was proposed to be located, or the preschool was proposed to be located in the sanctuary of the church. The applicant is proposing to move the preschool from the sanctuary of the church into the parish hall / church office building. The church offices would then move to the back of the sanctuary building. So that's the second change, is that in addition to increasing the number of students, they're looking to move it from one building to the other. Third, they are looking to change the arrangement of their outdoor play area. You'll recall back in 2008, there were 2 play areas that were approved as possibilities by the Board of Zoning Appeals to be fenced play areas. And I'll show you the site plan that was submitted back in 2008. You'll see that original option number 1 was a 56 by 37 and a half foot area just to the north of the drive that is behind the Parish Hall building. And original option number 2 was a fenced-in area directly behind the Parish Hall building. And there are 2 new options that the applicant would like to propose and get the board's feedback on, and she would actually like the flexibility to do either one of these. She is not certain at this time which of these 2 options the preschool would like to go with. See, the option number 1 would be to fence in the area that is directly in front of the Parish Hall building. It could kind of go behind it, wrap around that existing driveway, and then along the front, along Cason Lane, and then back down to the building. It's kind of an odd shape, so it was difficult to quantify the exact size of that area. Option number 2 would be an 87 by 87 area, which is larger than the area that was approved back in 2008, and it would be a little bit closer to the southern property line and to the residences on Windermere Drive. Also, back in 2008, the former applicant in 2008 volunteered to do an opaque privacy fence along the southern lot line, in addition to the existing landscaping that's there along the southern property line. Ms. Soria is actually just requesting to do vinyl-coated chain link fencing around the play area, and to not do one side as a privacy fence. There really is actually a pretty good screen there along the back of those houses. I believe that those trees were planted when the church was originally built, and the board may wish to discuss, whether or not it would even be necessary to add that privacy fence along that southern property line. That is something that she is just looking to do, the black vinyl-coated chain link fence along the entire perimeter of the play area. Also, one of the things that differs from her application, she initially said in her application that traffic would flow from Cason down to Windermere like so. Traffic will actually flow from Windermere up to Cason, because people will be dropping their children off here, and that matches the normal flow of traffic. The applicant also wanted to clarify the hours of operation, which were not included in the 2008 application. The hours of operation will be from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Staff did not include the requirement for a photometric lighting plan, because the applicant is not proposing to light the outdoor play area. That will only be utilized during daylight hours, so she is not looking to add any additional lighting. If the board approves this request, staff recommends the following conditions. The Planning Commission or the planning staff at the discretion of the planning director must grant site plan approval for the proposed development. Number 2, if option number 1 is proposed to be implemented for the outdoor fenced play area, it must be located a minimum of 30 feet from the curb of Cason Lane. That's a recommendation from the city's traffic engineer to provide an adequate distance off of Cason Lane, which, as we know, is a highly traveled street. In addition, if the fence is proposed to be located in the 20-foot public utility and drainage easement that is located along that front property line, then permission from the easement holders must be obtained to locate the fence in that easement. Number 3, if option number 2 is proposed to be implemented for the outdoor fenced play area, then a pedestrian way from the rear of the building to the play area, included a painted crosswalk across the driveway, must be constructed. These improvements must be shown on the site plan. And now I'll just show you some pictures real quick. This is the front of the existing parish hall and office. As you can tell, it's an older house that was converted into the parish hall and office for the church. This is a shot of the south side yard taken from across Cason Lane. You can see these existing mature evergreen trees along the southern property line. The applicant proposes to bring the fenced-in play area around this driveway so that there would be a concrete area for children to ride tricycles or big wheels or whatnot.
Hey, Mr. Blomley, so the proposal is to move the classes from the house to the other building?
No, from the sanctuary building to the house.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And this is another shot of the front of the Parish Hall building, and this would be the play area if they choose to go with that option, and if it is approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals. This is a shot of the existing tree row along that southern property line. This is looking at the neighboring house directly to the south of the Parish Hall building. And this is the existing tree row south of where the play area across the driveway would be adjacent to. They have a little bit of play equipment already outside in the area where, which is labeled on the sheet as option number 2, the 87 by 87 play area that would be further off Cason Lane. And these are just some shots of the properties across Cason Lane. And with that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Ms. Soria is here if you have any questions for her.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Ms. Soria, anything you'd like to add to the application? Okay. Then at this time, we'll conduct, any questions for Ms. Soria? At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion. We can modify the special use permit in one single motion, I suspect.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And I think one of the things that will need to be considered is whether or not one option is preferred over the other, if both options are acceptable, because you will need to know that heading forward. In 2008, when they presented two options, the board made it as a part of their motion, as a part of your motion, that either option was acceptable with regards to the two options that were presented in 2008.
Okay. I guess my greatest concern is the increase in the number of students jumping from, what, 12 to 30? Is that right? At any given time?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. What traffic flow is going to, I'm sure you probably went over trying to keep up with you, traffic flow is going to be how to drop off and pick up 30 kids from the school? Where is it going to go? How are they going to get in and out of this property?
Well, there are currently two ways in and out of the property. There's one off of Windermere Drive to the south. There's a small public street called Red Bridge Drive that was just basically extended as a private drive into the property. And then there's a direct access onto Cason Lane closer to the church sanctuary building itself. And so traffic would be proposed to flow during pickup and drop-off times from Windermere up Red Bridge into the church's property and then out the main driveway on Cason Lane.
Is that an organized event that's directed by the school, or is that just common practice, or is it hopefully that's what will happen?
I think hopefully that's what will happen. Ms. Soria may be able to better explain how she does intend to direct traffic and have parents know how they are to enter and exit the parking lot.
Okay, and one more question, then we'll get Ms. Soria up here. But is the property then, looking at this right here, the property then would be to the north. It looks like it's pretty far away from the church itself, right? The next neighboring house. That's
correct. The church has a lot of surplus property right now to the north and to the west.
Okay.
The buildings are centered basically on the southeast corner of the property.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out what property is going to take the brunt of an increase, twofold, threefold increase of kids out there. Okay. All right. You want to come tell us about traffic?
Thank you. I propose that they come in from Windermere and drop off. It would be somewhat of a staggered drop-off. Not everyone will be arriving at the same time. There is somewhat of a window for them to arrive in the mornings. It would be somewhere between 7:30 and 9. So it wouldn't be an influx of 30 people at one time. It would be during those hours would be the drop-off and for the beginning of the school day.
How do they know to do that? Why would they just drive in off of Case Lane?
Oh, I would have to tell them what to do in our policies and procedures. Right now we are there and we are operating, less children and less hours per day, but at the very beginning of the year, we address what's appropriate for drop-off and pick-up so that everything's very organized for the safety of the children and for efficiency.
Okay.
That road from Windermere, Red Bridge, is that what we're saying? It's not blocked in any way, correct?
Right now, there's a chain going across it where the property of the church ends, and that was just so that people wouldn't drive through, unwanted. But we can remove that for those purposes.
What's the new hours that the kids will be there from 7, beginning as early as 7 to what time?
I'm proposing before care, which would be 7:30 to 9, and an after care, which would be 3 to 5:30. But the school day would be, 9 to 3.
Okay, but could be 7 to 5:30.
It could be for some students.
7:30 to 5:30.
7:30 to 5:30. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right. We've already conducted the public hearing. We'll do a motion.
Yeah. I'll make a motion that we approve the amended application with allowing the applicant to use either option that they choose as they proposed, subject to all staff comments.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Ms. Reed, that application has been approved. All right, thank you. All right, get ready here. We've got application S 11049 by Mr. Ron Gilbert of Lee Neon Signs for Valvoline Instant Oil Change, requesting a variance from Section 25 1/4, 24A22 of the City of Murfreesboro Sign Ordinance, which prohibits a sign placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement on property located at 1730 South Rutherford Boulevard. All right, Mr. Kerr, you are up.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, members of the board. As you stated, the proposed location of this application is 1730 South Rutherford Boulevard, and it is within a commercial highway zone. The applicant, Mr. Ron Gilbert, is requesting permission to erect one internally illuminated ground sign with 90 square foot display area and an overall height of 16 feet. The sign will be located within a 25-foot water and sewer easement. The agreement for a sign in the City of Murfreesboro water and sewer easement has been signed by the Water and Sewer Department and the Director of Building and Codes. The applicant will comply with all other setbacks and regulations, and Mr. Gilbert is in attendance today to answer any questions as well as myself.
All right. Any questions from Ms. Kerr? All right, Mr. Gilbert, anything you'd like to add to the application? And at this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the application. Don't see any staff comments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Mr. Gilbert, that application has been approved. Thank you. Appreciate your patience, too. We'll now move on to application S11050 by Mr. Buddy Follis of Sign Masters for the Agnahatri Group, requesting a variance from Section 25 1/4 24A22 of the City of Murfreesboro sign ordinance, which prohibits a sign placed in or over a public utility or drainage easement. This is for property located at 1624 New Salem Highway. Ms. Carter.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The applicant, Prady Agnahatri, is requesting permission to erect one internally illuminated ground sign with a 120 square foot display area and an overall height of 25 feet within a 20-foot public utility easement. The sign itself is not within the public utility easement. It is overhanging the public utility easement. The actual foundation itself will also be out of the easement. They're requesting that just for the overhang of the sign be granted. An agreement for a sign in the City of Murfreesboro easement has been signed by the Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department, the Director of Building and Codes, and the Murfreesboro Electric Department. However, the Murfreesboro Electric Department has required a 12-foot vertical and horizontal clearance from its overhead electric facilities as a condition of the approval. An agreement for the sign and easement has also, a letter has been submitted from Atmos Energy and Bell South. The applicant will comply with all setbacks and regulations. If the board does approve this application, staff recommends the following conditions. That per MED's approval, that a 12-foot vertical and horizontal clearance from the overhead electric utilities is required. And Mr. Blake Manning with Sign Masters Company, as well as myself, are present to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Kerr. Any questions for Ms. Kerr? All right. Thank you. Mr. Manning, anything you'd like to add to the application? All right. Then at this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application? And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Chairman Rogers, I make a motion we approve the sign variance.
Subject to the comments there. I'll second.
Yes, thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Manning, that application has been approved. Thank you. Appreciate your patience as well. All right, we are now on to staff reports and other business.
I have a couple items.
I
promise they'll be short. Put before you, and I emailed to you last week, the 2012 BZA calendar of submittal deadlines and meeting dates. Unlike the last couple of years, I did check to see when spring break was going to be for both the city and the county school systems, and our March 28th meeting does not conflict with spring break. Spring break is the week of the 19th through the 23rd. At any rate, I'd like the board to consider this under other business to approve the calendar as presented, or if you have any changes, to discuss those changes.
All right. Any comments on the calendar? I know Ken, Mr. Halliburton's usually our point man, world traveler on that. Available.
I thought I'd beat him to the punch this year.
Looks great to me.
All right. Cleared the highest hurdle there.
Yeah, right.
All right, well, if there's no objection, then is there a motion to approve the calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Further discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. That calendar has been approved.
All right, and the last item that I have today is just kind of a heads up of something that we're going to be considering under staff reports and other business next month. Our rules of procedure call for the election of officers after the chair and vice chair's terms. Positions of chair and vice chair go along with the term, and Chairman Rogers and Vice Chairman Young were both recently reappointed after their terms expired at the end of June. So we are happy to have them serving again on the Board of Zoning Appeals for another term. We appreciate your service to the city. But one thing that we need to formally do at next month's meeting is to elect chairman and vice chairman, since you are beginning new terms, and so that will be on the agenda next month, is to, we'll accept nominations for chair and vice chair and elect chairman and vice chairman, and whoever would like to be nominated is welcome to do so. But anyway, I just wanted to give you a heads up that will be under next month's agenda. It's probably something we should have taken care of at the July meeting, but it slipped my mind, and so want to make sure we get it on next month's agenda and let you know about that.
All right. Hit the campaign trail as soon as we leave. All right. Any other business? If not, we're adjourned.